Dave, I had the pleasure of meeting you through a bunch of connections. I felt like you were coming at me from all angles in a way, right? Um, that's what I felt like. And you and I sat down, we had a chat. I know you jumped in the hub for a little bit and you were able to feel that out with podcasting. Um, I just know that like you're big into helping people with trauma and, and how you taught, you're still teaching, I
Mhm.
believe, yeah, through trauma, helping people. And so, I'm going to let you share more about that because this is all about you here. But can you just start off with who's Dave today, and you can even mention about your podcast and what you're doing and or what you're really working on at the moment.
Well, I could tell you, John, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be on the podcast. I've been looking forward to our conversation for some time. And we met, I think, through a variety of different connections. I think Chris Mamoni was the primary person who introduced us. And one of the things I've discovered about the podcasting world is we have just an incredible network of podcasters who work together with each other. We refer mutual guests to each other. And it's like this great community of support and encouragement. And that's one of the things I never thought I would see getting into podcasting. I would never see that sense of community. I've seen community elsewhere, but this was kind of a bonus piece for me, being a podcaster. But who I am today is certainly not who I was at 47 years of age, and I'm 70 years old now. Um, I, in a past life, which seems like a past lifetime ago, I was an addictions counselor and a clinical supervisor for a state-run inpatient facility in Utica, New York, where I dealt with individuals with both substance use issues and mental health issues. In 2000, I worked from 1986 to 2012, and I retired after 30 years of service in both county and state service. And at the age of 57, I started teaching while I was working in January of 2003 at Utica University. I've been there for 22 years. I teach a variety of courses that are related to clinical issues, helping, students understand how to deal with trauma-related issues. So I teach death, dying, and bereavement, care of the human spirit, family stress and coping, and impact of addiction on children and families, and also teach a couple of psychology courses um, at the Pratt Munson School of Art. So I retired in 2012, John, but I retired to a whole different set of activities, which I enjoyed doing. Um, and podcasting is another piece of that. I started the Teaching Journeys podcast on March 31st, 2023. I released my 165th episode today. Um, we have a YouTube and a presence on all other major podcast platforms. I started that at the encouragement of two of my students who for a year said, you got to take the lessons that you teach in the classroom, and particularly in the death, dying, and bereavement classroom, and put it out in the podcast world. So after a year of prodding and cajoling, and they finally convinced me, and um, so it's been a 2.5 year journey, a little bit over 2.5 years with the podcast, and it's the mantra is we are all students and teachers, so let's learn from each other. I feature guests who have transcended their own traumas and are willing to share what they've learned to help others who are in my audience who are listening who are going through their own challenges. I have also talked to coaches, authors who also have stories to share and tools that they've utilized or learned through their writing, through their work with other individuals with trauma, and they've shared what they've learned through their work with, so, with my audience. So the podcast is really an extension of the service work I've been committed to as a result of my own trauma. So I remember you did a post where you said, so it was something about what changed at age 40, what changed for you, or something like that, or did life change for you at age 40?
Right.
And I posted something at age 47, something to the effect that everything changed at age 47. And I know you said, well, we're going to get into that in the podcast. So I'm going to preempt that. I'm going to save you asking me that question.
All right, let's do that.
I'm going to tell you what that was because um, I'm going to tell you what that was. So it was about midway into my tenure as an addictions professional. I have three children. I've been married for 42 years. I have an older son, Dan, and a younger son, Matt. but the story's about my middle child and my only daughter, Janine. May 2nd, 2002, at the age of 18, she gave birth to to a child, my first grandchild, Brianna Lee. 3 weeks later, she was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer called the velar rhabdomyosarcoma. Okay. And there was an undefined, there was an 8 centimeter uh, mass at the bottom of her right foot. She had injured her right foot um, during during her pregnancy. Freak accident. It never responded to traditional treatment for a foot injury. It didn't respond to foot elevation, didn't respond to rest, walking boot, nothing. After Brianna was born, and this was Jean's choice, they did a biopsy. They did an MRI, and they did a biopsy, which they found highly suggestive of cancer. So as I mentioned, May 26th, we got the diagnosis. Now, the week before that, John, May 19th, I found out that I had successfully completed the requirements for my master's in social work degree. May 2nd, my granddaughter's born. So, and then May 26th, we get the diagnosis of cancer. June 2nd, that diagnosis was confirmed by the Dana-Farber Hospital and Research Institute in Boston, which is one of the best hospitals in the country for pediatric sarcoma research and treatment. In a 5-minute consult, they told me that your daughter has a stage 4 tumor with bone marrow and lymph node involvement. There is absolutely no cure for cancer. The only hope we have is aggressive chemotherapy to put her cancer in remission until they can find a cure. Now, John, I'm going to ask you, and I've asked this probably randomly of podcast hosts, what do you think the doctor was telling me and my daughter and my family?
I'm gonna guess everything would be okay.
No?
No?
The message that I heard loud and clear, and I saw my daughter's tears streaming down her face, was that unless there's a miracle, your daughter's going to die.
Uh,
Um, that's what I heard. The research that I did, and I've always been a science-based guy. I've always dealt in facts, figures, and I always wanted to know what my odds were. The 5-year survival rate for her type of cancer was 10 to 15%, which
mm,
means that there was, depending on the research, which meant that there was an 85 to 90% chance that she was going to die within 5 years. And 10 months after she was diagnosed, she died, as I call it now, transition from the physical body to the spiritual world at the age of 18 on March 1st, 2003, with hospice services, um, with hospice alongside of us. So at 47 years old, my idea of a midlife crisis, and people's idea of a midlife crisis at 47 for guys is, you get a hairpiece, you buy a sports car, you try to pick up women that are 20 years younger than you, just so
yeah.
you can, just kind of defy your mortality, defy that, defy mortality. However, for me at 47 years old, my mission was to figure out who am I? What kind of a world is this going to look like for me now that my daughter isn't in it? And how am I going to re-engage in a world that doesn't have my daughter in it? So at 47 years old, I was taking a look at all of my values, all of my priorities, all of my beliefs, and saying what stays, what goes, what changes, what beliefs get expanded on. Um, so, and if you asked me, John, who the person I was at 47 years old, I couldn't even begin to tell you now. You would need a search party, and I mean probably a special ops team to find that guy, because that guy is nowhere in the picture anymore. I am so far removed from 47. In fact, sometimes the transition is so stark, I don't even know. I feel like I'm different from sometimes I could be different from day to day, depending on what's happened. So, and I continue to evolve. My narrative continues to grow. Everything I've done, whether it's been teaching, whether it's been writing, whether it's been doing the podcast, has been because of a strong commitment to engaging in service and honor of and with my daughter, um, to try to help others as a result of my own trauma. So that is right now, that's my story in a nutshell. And
Yeah.
it's led to other things, but that's the backstory.
That's the backstory. Okay. There's a lot to unpack on all that. So let's just start with you were helping with addiction and everything. What got you started with helping other people around addiction?
You know, John, it's funny because every career choice I've ever made seems to have found me before I found it. Um, I actually, one of the first jobs I had was in 1982. I was a youth employment counselor for a local non-for-profit social service agency, and I worked for what we call the Youth Employment Network. So what I would do is I would go around, interview employers about prospective career choices in their field, compile, and this was before the days of computer, compile like index cards. um, I would, we had an administrative assistant who would type out everything on a typewriter and create files. So that's dating myself, but that's the way it was. So one of the agencies I found was a day treatment center that was affiliated with then the Mercy's Alcoholism Treatment Center, where eventually I began working. Um, and I ended up doing volunteer workshops on resume writing, on job skills. I liked the staff. I loved the clients that I worked with so much that I wanted that when I had the opportunity to get into the field, I did. I had an opportunity to get a job at the Mercy Alcoholism Treatment Center, which then became the McPike Addiction Treatment Center. Um, and from there, it was history. And it turns out, John, that working with addiction, I think, was inextricably woven into my DNA because the other part of my story, one part of my story was that my father left me when I was 5 years old to be raised by my mother as an only child. Through pure divine intervention, serendipity, however you choose to look at it, my first cousin on my father's side of the family found me. We connected, and she gave me the entire family history. Part of that family history was of addiction, mental illness, and a lot of other different things that were passed on from generation to generation. Um, and so I think it was inextricably woven in my DNA that I would be attracted, or the field of addiction would find me because of the history on my father's side of the family, which became my history.
Yeah, and then you were just helping others
Hmm.
navigate through that.
Yep.
Interesting. And then before we go further with some other stuff here, what would you say your definition of trauma is?
For me, it's any event that shatters our understanding of the world as we know it, that alters our worldview, and that has pervasive effects on mind, body, and emotions.
Mhm.
Um, we carry trauma in our bodies. I mean, you can see individuals who are carrying trauma. They may walk a little slower. They may walk more shuffled. You can see the tension that they may carry in their neck, their taut facial expressions, lower back. Um, they may not move as nimbly as other individuals who are not possessed by trauma, but the body carries everything. A great book that I would recommend to your listeners is when the body knows the score by Bessel van der Kolk. It's a great book that talks about how trauma affects how we carry it in our body, how it affects us neurologically, um, how it affects all aspects of physiological functioning. So that's how I would define it for me.
Yeah, thank you. Um, yeah, I've heard about that book too. I haven't done it myself, but it reminds me of I was down in Texas back in May and I shared, my trauma in a way, but I don't think my trauma is as bad as somebody else's trauma. Like, like something you had to experience, right? So I was with somebody and they said trauma is trauma, right? And so like
Hmm.
it's whatever our experiences are, just like you shared your definition, right? I experienced something, I job loss and divorce, and to me that was my trauma. But podcasting, I feel like how do people go through some of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, but they probably look at me and go, how'd you go through that?
Uh-huh.
It's just so we have to remember that. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and we need to hold space for others because, even if we think it's less or worse, we have to give them that space to navigate through whatever that trauma is.
And, for me, John, I've had individuals say this to me. She goes, that they really feel it's almost like a version of imposter syndrome. Like when they hear that I've lost a child, and their version of tragedy is either job loss or divorce or the loss of a parent. They said, geez, my problems seem to be minuscule compared to losing a child. I'll stop them right there and I'll say, look, my worst tragedy that I've ever gone through is going to be the loss of my child. No parent should ever have to live to bury one of their children. I don't care if you're 47 or 97. That should never happen. It shouldn't happen. In an ideal utopian universe, that wouldn't happen.
Mm.
But we're living in a universe that's far from ideal and far from utopian. So we're living in a universe where children die before our parents. But I can tap into the worst pain, the pain of my worst tragedy, and tap into the worst pain of yours. I know what the pain of tragedy is like, that what it does to alter our sense of self-worth, what it does, how it affects us physically, how it affects us emotionally. So just because I can meet you at your worst tragedy because I know the pain of mine, and I can meet you with the pain of yours. So therefore, our pain becomes, it's very, very much a universal thing. So for me, I stopped comparing whose loss is more tragic. Everybody has their own version of tragedy, and it's my job as a bereavement support specialist and then as a clinician is to use the knowledge from my worst tragedy and the pain from my worst tragedy to meet you with the pain of yours, so that we can have a conversation, and I can be a companion to you on the journey. And Ram Dass has said, the late Ram Dass said, we're all just walking each other home. And that's what we're doing. So we're walking each other home, and we're walking alongside the road of your worst life-altering tragedy. And that doesn't have to be mine.
Right. I like that saying. It's cool. So when you do help people with their trauma and you sit down with somebody, do you find that it's hard for them to actually mention some of this stuff?
I think when I ask them, and I've done this on podcasts before, I'll ask them like, I just did a podcast with a woman whose son died in a car accident. So I'll ask them, tell me about your son. And you could see the smile light up on their face, and they want to talk. The biggest misconception is that if we ask them about the loved one that they've lost or ask them to tell their story, that they're going to be upset. Well, guess what, John? They're already upset. I was already upset in early grief when somebody was worried about upsetting me. And I said, look, you're not going to upset me. Just ask me whatever you want to ask me. I'll talk about my daughter 24/7. And so when you ask somebody to share the story of who they lost, and they want you to know the person who they lost in your eyes, and you can establish in their eyes, and if you can establish a space where you are establishing yourself as a listener, and you're saying, I would be willing to walk with you through the worst pain of your life, and be present for the worst pain of your life. That's a gift for them. Are there going to be tears? Sure. But is there going to be smiles? Absolutely. It's because you were considerate enough to remember and to ask them, tell me about your son. And always I would say, tell me about Joe, tell me about Don. I would always say by name. And I would make sure that I address them by name. Show me a picture. Show me a video that is, that has a specific memory for you. What in really One of the ways to deal with trauma, particularly the trauma with grief, is create a space where they are getting to tell you who they lost. They're getting to share their story. They're getting to share those memories, and they're getting to share what that person meant to them. And just listen and provide some observations, provide some thoughts, and provide some validation. The other thing is that they might say, I feel like I'm going crazy with this grief thing. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't concentrate. I said, guess what? That's normal. That's normal for every loss that you experience. You're going to go through that progression. So show yourself some grace. Let's talk about some ways that you can do some self-care to the extent that you have the energy to do it. And we'll figure out what your energy levels are and develop some ideas based on that. Um, and just try to normalize as much as possible. So it's about being a good therapist. I tell my students this in all my classes, you have to be a good listener first before you can be a good to be a good therapist. That's a prerequisite. Let the story unfold, then give your observations and allow those individuals, empower them to say, Dave, you're not totally right with this observation, or you're totally off with this observation. It's always putting them, empowering, trauma, individuals who have been affected by trauma to set the stage and to share what they feel is relevant for them. And if we could do that, you don't need to have like 25 credentials after your name to do that. It's just how do you hold space for somebody? How do you support somebody? How do you create a space where they feel safe to share what's going on with them and share their story? You can do
Mm.
that, you're going to be gold.
Yeah, how does, I mean, obviously this is your profession, right? But how does somebody be that person, become that person that they can actually lean on? And let's just say they're not going to a therapist. They might be leaning on a friend or something. Like
Mhm.
how can you show up to be that person when in need?
I'm going to tell you a little trade secret about therapy. Well, it's actually not a trade secret, but I just figured I wanted to create a little drama for the listener.
Let's
So,
go.
create a little, all right, you got your seat yet? So,
Yeah, I am.
yeah, here. I do not have a therapist game face or a Dave game face. What I bring into the situation is me, my personality, my energy. What has been shown to get people to connect with a therapist? Credentials are great, but you can have an insurance salesman that knows everything about insurance, but their presentation's so dry you wouldn't buy anything from them.
Yeah.
But if you have somebody that's enthusiastic, who's warm, who's genuine, who's excited about being in your presence, that's going to get their attention. So all you have to do is show a compassionate presence. If you're genuine, if you're warm, and if you can show empathy to somebody's pain, that's what's going to make people connect to you beyond the credentials. And it's important. I think, if you're going to have a good therapist, you need to find out what their credentials are, what their training was. It's like going shopping for anything. You find out, is this therapist going to be a good match for me? And if that therapist isn't, when you get started, then you should have the right to go see another therapist that you think you're going to align with. So, but it's just, I've never had a clinical game face or a Dave game face. It's always been my clinical work, the therapy that I do is an extension of who I am personally. And as long as they can see that, you're going to be fine.
So show up as yourselves.
Show up as yourself.
Yeah,
That's the greatest gift you can give somebody, John.
yeah.
Unless, of course, the person doesn't like you, then of course that isn't a great gift for them. But for the most part, somebody isn't going to ask you to to take some time for their story if they don't think you're a warm, genuine, safe individual anyway.
Mhm.
So I mean that's basically for me that's the not so trade secret. Be
Nice.
yourself.
Yeah. Just be yourself, right? And so you'll find if you're going through trauma, you'll find that right person you can lean on because if like you kind of mentioned here, if that person ain't going to listen to you because they don't like you, they're not going to listen to you. So you have to go find the other person that's going to listen to you.
Yeah.
And I say listen because you also mentioned listen, like you have to be the listener. Um, so I don't know what their therapists are like and your whole practice and everything, but do you tend to listen, ask questions, and then the patient or the client, they wind up just answering that question and they knew it all along of how they can fix their problem or navigate through it?
Well, basically I listen. I'll
Hmm.
ask questions. I'll ask the client, what do you want to get out of this relationship with me? What are your goals for treatment? Everything ethically, John, whether you're a therapist, whether you're a counselor, addictions counselor, social worker, healthcare professional, everything is client driven. The client drives the bus. The client has the right to self-determine. You can't force treatment on a client that doesn't want it. So these are all the ethical considerations. So I will say, what do you want to get out of treatment? What are your goals? What are your preferences for what happens after treatment? Everything is determined. So we'll talk about it. Then I will ask them, as I get to know them, as I get to build a relationship, I have a couple of other ideas for you that may be helpful. Would you be willing to listen? And it's always about treating a client with respect, treating them with dignity, and empowering them to make whatever choices they feel are going to be good for them at that time. Even if you don't agree with the choices, the only thing that I can do is say, hey, you may want to consider this course of action. If your course of action doesn't work, it's all about providing options and empowering them to choose. Um, I will ask my students, I said, how would you like it if I was your advisor and I gave you, here's your schedule for your 4 years of college. Here's the courses you're going to take. Come and see me when you graduate. Now, would you like that type of approach? Would you like to be told that this is going to, how your 4 years are going to be? Every one of them shakes their head. No, I don't. Nobody, I don't want anybody telling me what to do. I said, good, because you shouldn't let them. Because why should you give your voice, you turn over your power to anybody? But don't, use your voice, tell us, let's do this collaboratively. So it's the same thing with clients. I mean, and a student might, somebody might, a student may want to take a course that think, yeah, this course might be a little better for you, but ultimately it's their choice. So, and I'm not going to mess with that. All I can do is provide them some options that they can kind of chew on later down the road, or maybe, consider later down the road. But yeah, so, that's what makes therapy, I think it can become a very empowering process, and it needs to be.
Yeah. And so for you, you had to help yourself, or did you go to therapy and kind of navigate through that?
This is kind of, I mean, I think any therapist will tell you they've been to therapy at some point,
Mhm.
and I've been to therapy before because ultimately working with clients a lot of times will bring up some unresolved issues in yourself. And you can't resolve the issues with the client. You can't use a client for therapy because if you did, that'd be unethical. So you couldn't do that. Um, So, but yeah, at the time Janine was sick, ironically, I was in therapy with a psychiatrist who, believe it or not, did not see medication as the first course of action. He wanted to do therapy. And I was doing an internship at a skilled nursing facility in Clinton, New York, which is in the Utica, New York area. Um, and some unresolved issues came up with the death of my mom and with the death of my supervisor and mentor, who taught me everything there was to know about addiction, working with teams, supervising people, working with patients. All of this resurfaced. So I was in therapy with him when my daughter got sick. And then when I told him my daughter got sick, he said, David, our priorities have now changed to more practical concerns. And I was with him probably for about a year and a half after my daughter transitioned, and he was there right from the get-go. He was supportive of me. He wrote me up with a mental health diagnosis saying that I was, something called was adjustment disorder, something non-stigmatizing, adjustment disorder with mixed features, depression and anxiety, because, basically the Family Medical Leave Act, John, was going to give me 15 days to take care of my sick daughter. And so my director at work, he had this you call it this Irish temper. He was an Irishman, and when he got upset, you could see it. And apparently, he was throwing out expletives. I wasn't there because I told my boss, I said, "Look, I'm going home." I said, "I don't care what I got to do if I have to if I have to go broke for 3 months, for months, I'm going to take care of my daughter. I'm going home. I can't work." So he told his boss to tell me, told my boss to tell me that if you could find somebody to write you up with a mental diagnosis, mental health diagnosis, I could get paid sick leave. So I asked the psychiatrist, that was Dr. Goslin. I said, Dr. Goslin, would you be able to do this for me? He goes, well, David, I wouldn't be lying if I said you couldn't work. So he gave me the letter. I got full support from my work to be home with my daughter for 3 months. Then went back to work on modified work restriction. They took my therapist did not want me doing supervision, having that additional stress. So I did basically case management duties. So I was able to develop further my case management skills. So, and then I went back to full-time supervision probably about a year later, a year after my daughter passed. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how that whole piece evolved
Yeah.
with therapy. And it helped because he was a studying force for me. And he was one of the he's long since passed away himself, but I'll never forget what he did for me. And it was divine intervention that he was there for me when I needed him to be there for me. As a Utica University community was there for me because I started working there 6 weeks before my daughter transitioned,
Mhm.
and I had gotten offered the job when she was doing better with her chemo, or the chemo was having a positive effect. So, I signed the contract and I was committed. I couldn't just say I couldn't walk away from it. So that community was there to support me. My students showed me probably more love than I ever thought I deserved because I had trouble loving myself after all that happened with my daughter. Their validation, their energy allowed me to I fed off of their energy until I could find a reserve of my own. And my students I consider to be an extended portion of my family. Now, if I could find an accountant who can try to help me out or write them all off as tax deductions, I'd be all right. But I say that kiddingly, of course. You can edit that part out if you want to, though.
No,
So
it's
they
all
were,
good.
so they were not complicit with anything. So.
You're all right. No, I'm glad that you shared, how you helped everybody and still are, right? And then how you also helped yourself with therapy, dealing with trauma and everything else like
Well,
that. And
And
um,
then, and there was more than just therapy too. I'll have to share that. There's more than just therapy. There was something else that occurred that really changed the way I looked at life, death, and life after death, and really helped me learn that the worlds of psychology and science and spirituality could integrate to help individuals transcend trauma and understand their behaviors and their place in the world. So that's the other part of the story, but we'll get to that whenever you want.
now I was just gonna actually get to you where people can actually like find you, connect with you, learn about your podcast, everything you have going on.
Yeah, you can, you can find the podcast. It's the Teaching Journeys podcast. It's on YouTube. If you type Dave Roberts, 301 is March 1st is when my daughter, but the month and day of her transition date. Um, I encourage you to follow the podcast. We have some great episodes. You're going to be on it soon, I think in November,
Yes, that's
where
right.
you're going to be a guest. So everybody, make sure you listen to the episode with John. I'm sure he's going to have a lot of great wisdom to share with my audience. Um, you can find my website is davidrobertsmsw.com. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. You can find me under my name. Um, my son calls me the world's oldest millennial. So I'm on social media. I also have an author page at psychologyprofessorandminister.com. And if you're okay with it, I'll display the book that I have.
Sure, absolutely.
Um, this is a book that I wrote, co-authored with Reverend Patty Farino, called When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister. It was published in March of 2021, or we rolled it out in March of 2021. The book, I met Patty through pure serendipity, and this would be probably John another podcast episode. But through pure serendipity, she facilitated a spiritually transformative experience at her home in Long Island in 2010, a little over 7 years after my daughter transitioned, that helped me find peace with my daughter's passing while still honoring the grieving process and convincing me in the survival of consciousness after death. The other part was that we had marathon conversations that talk about how psychology and spirituality can integrate, because I'd always been very science-based and rejected spiritual, premises, spiritual theories, metaphysical principles. But after the weekend that I had at Patty's home with the experiences she facilitated and our conversations, I have become a full card-carrying member of the integrative medicine integrative philosophy when it comes to helping individuals transcend trauma and promoting optimal physical and mental health. And it was all because of Patty's influence. And for 10 years, I bugged her to write a book. She finally said, yep. So during the pandemic, we wrote it. It's on Amazon and Kindle and paperback format. We've been grateful for the reviews we've gotten for it. And that is the other, this was the other culminant, the other focal point of my journey. The podcast now has been an extension of that.
Awesome. That's
So
great.
yeah, so that's how you can all get in touch with me.
Yeah, so we got all that.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I have one question I ask everybody. What are three key things you've learned and used along your journey?
One is that don't believe that life is fair because it isn't. Life isn't always fair. What is key for me is that the quality of our life depends on how well we respond to the challenges and transcend the challenges that are ultimately going to be presented to us. Secondly, is this is a saying from my old one of my I'm going to give two Neil Peart quotes as my other two. Neil Peart is the late great drummer of the band Rush. He wrote a book called Ghost Rider Travels on the Healing Road that detailed his journey after two tragedies in his life, the death of his 19-year-old daughter and the death of his common law wife 10 months apart in the late 1990s. He took a 55,000-mile road trip on his motorcycle through Canada, Mexico, and the United States to essentially find himself. And his quote was, I needed to leave. I needed to go out to determine what kind of a person I wanted to be and the type of a world that I wanted to live in, which is a universal, I think, truth and a universal task that we all face when we're going through life-altering challenge. One of the things that he said is that keep moving, something will come up. And it may be the most unusual thing that may happen that gives you hope again. For him, he was sitting at a bank in Quebec somewhere, and he saw two rocks that looked like they were, I don't know, two something to the effect of two giraffes or two animals kissing each other. I forget what it was, but he said he smiled at the notion that one he could even smile again, and he said from there he began to build his new world just with those two rocks that they were just jutting up. It looked like they were two, I don't know if I get two animals kissing. I forget the exact analogy, but sometimes the thing that gives us the most hope is the thing that we least expect. So keep moving, something will come up. And finally, we can't do this alone. And this is another Neil Peart quote from one of his songs, the lyrics he wrote, that we are islands to each other, building hopeful bridges on a troubled sea. Um, we can't do this alone, John. We need to be islands to each other. We need to have those communities of support. We need to be able to share our stories, share our traumas, share our pain in communities that support it. Um, so again, we're all islands to each other.
Well said. And that's exactly why we're podcasting, right?
That's right.
Reaching out to as many people as we can. Hopefully it touches that person. Um, no, they're all great. And again, I thank you for sharing everything that you shared today on this one episode. I'm sure we'll do another one sometime down the road and dive into more of your journey. So thank you. I appreciate it, Dave.
Oh, John, my pleasure. It was a blast being on your podcast, and I look forward to having you on mine. And I think it was great. Thank you again for for creating a space for me to share.
Absolutely. You're welcome.